Hello, and welcome to another episode of No Notes, where the conversation is always a perfect 10 out of 10. This podcast is powered by Elios, the most used and most loved AI platform in behavioral health, equipping more than 130 organizations and tens of thousands of providers with powerful automation tools that streamline documentation, simplify compliance, and surface deep care insights that drive better client outcomes. I'm your host, Dr. Denny Morrison, and for today's episode, we are excited to be joined by Dr. Dale Klatzker, an old friend and former CEO of Gaudenzia, an addiction treatment and recovery service organization with multiple locations across the Northeast. We'll chat about the unique challenges of addiction treatment organizations face and how AI solutions are positioned to help improve compliance, streamline documentation, and enhance care outcomes. Welcome, Dale, and thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Denny. I appreciate it. And again, as you said, we've known each other for many, many years. Actually, we were both, our hair was different colors when we were.
Yeah, funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tell us about your background. And, that is true. We've known each other for a long time and long before you ever got to Gaudenzia. So tell us a little bit about your background, Dale.
I've been a CEO of 4 different behavioral health organizations over the course of maybe the last 40 years.
So you can't keep a job.
I cannot keep a job. That's what I tell people. I have worked in New England, in the Boston area, in New Hampshire for 10 years, in Rhode Island for 15 years. And then in the last 5-6 years, I was in the Mid-Atlantic in the Philly area, but covered DC and Baltimore as well. So lots of areas with lots of issues, lots of problems.
Yeah. Were all of those addiction treatment facilities?
They all had aspects of addiction treatment, but most of them were basically community behavioral health organizations, CMHCs.
But Gaudenzia was primarily addiction treatment, is that correct?
Gaudenzia was almost exclusively addiction treatment, but obviously, or at least what I've learned over all these years, is it's pretty hard to make a distinction between somebody's mental health and their SUD issues.
That's a kind of a reflection of the siloed nature of healthcare, that there's physical healthcare, there's mental health care, there's substance use disorders. And the fact is, this is one person that has an amalgamation of all these things. Tell me about a little bit about kind of how you've seen the SUD business change over the past few years in your career.
Well, it has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. It's kind of a bifurcated world in SUD. It's a fragmented industry. A lot of very small mom and pop kinds of organizations who do this as yes, as a living, but more as a passion and as a mission. Then, as time has gone on, there's been the growth of a handful of extremely large aggregators, if you will, organizations that saw the fragmentation and said, this is a perfect opportunity to combine operations, get scale, get scope, use our market abilities to go after, commercial insurance and advertising. And so very attractive to private equity and venture capital. Those are organizations and environments who historically, even the ones that were not for profit, sought a commercial-based population. And frankly, nobody looked all that carefully. The insurers didn't. As the market became more competitive, as commercial insurance became, and managed care looked to squeeze every dollar out of everything it could squeeze, this seemed like an uncontrolled area. So they clamped down a lot more. And as they clamped down a lot more, margins became thinner and thinner. And on the edges, organizations didn't want to have empty beds. So even though they didn't necessarily desire to be reimbursed by the more traditional community mental health or behavioral health, Medicaid, state grant kind of reimbursement, they began begrudgingly to move into that territory. When I got to Gaudenzia about 6 years ago, I asked my staff, where do we get our clients from? And the number one referral source was word of mouth, which is terrific. That's what you want. Number two was these large for-profits sending me all their Medicaid business because they didn't want to serve that population, complicated population, poor reimbursement. Now, what you find is that commercial insurance is harder to come by. People have driven more bargains. They've squeezed down on lengths of stay, in particular in residential care. From 6 months to 3 months to 28 days to now maybe 5 days in some cases, if you're lucky. And people get whatever resources they can get. And so there's much more competition. So organizations like Gaudenzia didn't have to compete so much in the same ways that they do now. And the competition now is hard for SUD providers because they don't have the capital. They don't have the scale or scope generally. Gaudenzia is an exception. And it's just much more challenging environment when you have big dogs and little dogs. So
it sounds like it's bifurcated, that you've got kind of really big providers and really little providers, and maybe some in between, but more of that on the SUD side than on behavioral health. You think that's true?
I would, in my experience, that is true. Very much so.
And the clinical mix, the people who work in SUD is a little bit different than the clinical mix that you see in a traditional community mental health center. Has that been your experience?
Oh, absolutely. When I got to Gaudenzia, and I think it's probably still true, over 50% of the employees I had, and I had 1,300 staff, were people with lived experience, were graduates of programs like Gaudenzia or Gaudenzia itself. So a lot of lived experience, a lot of peer related stuff. A lot of it was unregulated for years and years and years, a lot of untrained people, but people had passion and commitment.
Well, I think it's safe to say that the people with lived experience bring something unique that a trained professional who has not kind of walked in those shoes cannot. As you mentioned, as the kind of like the lived experience peers started increasing on the behavioral health side, it became kind of clear to me as a former CEO that there's a unique voice there, and SUD's had that for a long time. I mean, that the whole history of the 12-step movement and Alcoholics Anonymous was founded on peers. So when you think about like technologies like Elios and AI, where does AI play a role in substance use disorder treatment?
Let's start with technology playing a role, and then we'll morph into AI playing a role. But because SUD providers have not had a lot of capital, things have been done more informally, more manually, more kind of on the fly. What's been important is the person, the client, the consumer. Let's help them. If you don't have time for the administrative stuff or the paperwork or the documentation, it's okay, because we're really here to help people, and that's what we want to do. And people have been able to get away with that for years and years and years. Corresponding to the blending of the revenue streams that I described, there's more regulation, there's more oversight, there's more compliance, there's more need to not shrug your shoulders and say, we don't need to worry about that. I've always believed for many, many years that you shouldn't have people, clinicians, case managers, people with lived experience, doing things that a machine can do faster and better. I've always looked and gravitated to people like yourself who have always been into technology and understood that those are our friends, that they're force multipliers. Yes, there's an investment involved in doing that, but it is a different investment than trying to find well-trained and to compensate staff when people don't gravitate to this industry, or when there aren't enough of them, or when that waxes and wanes. So let's have people on our staff and give them all the possible tools that we can and that we can afford, and let's have them do what they were trained to do and what they like to do, and let's get them away from doing the things that just burn them out and make them frustrated and don't really, at the end of the day, add value other than feeding the machine that exists of accountability and all that good stuff. So with AI, you've got force multiplier on steroids now, because you've got the ability for algorithms and programming to be able to aggregate lots and lots of use cases and lots of discussions over a long period of time, and learn from that and call that out and find the best patterns and reinforce what is evidence-based and make it person-centered and make it equitable and culturally appropriate. I've always been attracted to that. I've always been attracted to organizations that create that. And I think AI has enormous potential. I think we are just scratching the surface. Instead of being afraid of these are things we should be embracing, because it just makes us better at what we care about and what we need to do.
Well, it's interesting in that bifurcated market that you described earlier. You got your really big players, the really small mom and pop shops. The challenge of the cost of technology becomes kind of an interesting barrier for two different reasons in some ways. In the small shops, they don't have a lot of money. There is an investment in technology, be it AI or EHRs or pick it, whatever. But for the bigger shops, in my experience, has been that they don't want to spend the money on technology. Right. They see it just as until they got into the Medicaid business, they were doing mostly a fee-for-service business. Right. Billing was not that complex. You send a bill or you pay cash or whatever. Right. And so that might be changing now. But initially, what I saw was a huge resistance from those big players to even embrace electronic health records when everybody else had already gone electronic. Yeah. So how do what do you think about that? I mean, do you think there are ways to get around that for these providers, and can they show an ROI particularly for AI?
So a couple of things. I think we gravitate as administrators and providers, at least professional organizations, to whatever tools we can find that accomplish our jobs, right? We don't necessarily require every one of those tools to demonstrate a return on the investment of doing that. In the not-for-profit world, it's about being efficient and effective with the resources you have toward the benefit of the community and the consumers. In my mind, this is about giving people tools and resources, consumers and providers, to do their jobs well and to do them efficiently. Finding ways of making these investments is as necessary as being able to pay the heat and light and make sure the roof isn't leaking. These are not nice to haves. They're essentials to make our jobs doable and to get the best possible outcomes. I think the private equity venture capital folks do look at the bottom line. They don't look at this as a 10-year or 20-year or 50-year window. They look at what's going to happen. I made my big investment. I'm waiting for my return. I know that a lot of these are going to fail, so I'm either going to cut this loose, or I'm going to flip it, or I'm going to continue to aggregate. And in that environment, it's very narrow and focused.
That's really a good point. I think that with the investment capital guys, that they look at usually like about a 7-year window, and for when they want to get their return back. But I think when you think about it, EHRs are probably the biggest technology investment that we've made as an industry. All EHR vendors said this is going to make clinicians' lives better. What it didn't. It made their lives harder. It made the organization better. I mean, there was a good purpose to it, but it wasn't. The clinician at the front desk or the clinician seeing the client was not the beneficiary. They were probably the one who carried the load. But I think like AI tools like Elios are like the first technology I've seen that is directed at helping a clinician do their job better, faster, easier. Would you agree with that? I mean,
I totally agree. And again, being kind of a lifelong administrator, I have always sought out resources, tools, and technologies that fit that priority. It's not about buying something to make my life better. as a CEO or to show my board. It's about what makes the consumer's life better and the staff member's life better.
You know, I think you and I have talked about this, that one of the challenges that I think AI vendors, including Helios, have struggled with is bringing group therapy AI to the SUD market. Because what would you say, 90% of the treatment involved in SUD is group based? Do you think that's a fair statement?
I think it is a fair statement. I think I take a longer view, which is that there are no products that I have ever seen, even the ones that you've been involved with, Denny, that are perfect from the get-go. In my mind, with group, I was an early customer of Helios. I wanted group. I know that it's gone through multiple iterations and getting closer to being there. But you know what? Every clinician I've ever talked to in any organization I've been in hasn't liked documenting group notes. They're hard to do, and they're in many ways more complicated than an individual note, because you got to do one for the whole group, and then you have to do one for the individual within the group. Maybe the products that are out there now can't do everything, but if they can do some of that, that's better than what we've got now, and that's an efficiency, and that's a good thing. And again, I know that on the individual side, there's no question this makes people can make people more productive, more efficient, more compliant, because of all the things that the AI tools can do.
Well, I think, and I just for our listeners' perspective, that the group functionality will be coming fairly soon, I think, and you might be hearing something in the not too distant future from Helios about that. But let's talk about compliance. I mean, because I think you really hit on a good point, because while it's wonderful to have something help you write the note and all that kind of thing, making sure that the note is written and done in a way that is not going to bounce back on an audit or gets denied and you have to rework that claim again. Helios is targeting that both at the point of care for a clinician and then on the back end for QI managers to do 100% audits on their claims. Have you looked into that at all? I mean, I think the compliance product wasn't out yet when you were at Gaudenzia.
It was not. I know that my organization is using it actively. My old organization is using it actively now. But quite frankly, it's a huge issue. As dollars get scarcer, as competition for those dollars increases, as there is this tug of war between those that have those dollars and those that are billing and want those dollars, there's going to be scrutiny, and there's going to be laser focus on, did you do this the right way? Did you dot your I's and cross your T's? Did you cut and paste versus come up with something that really contributes to the treatment plan? Tools like Helios dramatically improve compliance, audit trails, oversight of those things just on that surface alone, not even looking at training and other things that can come from this tool. That's huge. The thing I'm also interested in with the Helios tool is it's not just a traditional clinician or a counselor and running a group. As more and more funders and more people in our industry recognize that lived experience, peer recovery support workers are critical and pay for those things, you have the same documentation headaches. Yeah. It's not like the people that are doing that did it or are trained in it because they like documenting or they love keeping notes. So I know that Helios has a case management tool. Others probably do as well. I think the more that can be oriented and acclimated and tweaked, that's a win. Yeah. That's a big win.
So at Gaudenzia, did you have a large mobile workforce that were out in the community seeing people?
Not as big as I wanted to, but yes.
Well, and I think kind of to your point, I mean, it's not just people with lived experience. It's case managers who maybe have a bachelor's degree. So you've got kind of your least trained professional out in the field working probably more autonomously than many other providers.
Right.
And so that a mobile tool that can give them some guardrails and keep them kind of focused on what they need to do and expedite their documentation experience, that really is a win. And and that's a very different use case than a trained psychologist seeing somebody in a clinic office.
Right.
Those are two different situations entirely.
The other piece, Denny, and maybe you're leading us to talk about this as well, but I think Elios is a tremendous training tool. So the ability to have a licensed or a trained supervisor be able to help new people or inexperienced people with their work, with motivational interviewing as opposed to, talking about the weather or whatever, those are things that are only going to improve both the satisfaction for the individual, the staff member, but absolutely for the consumer. Again, if you don't do that without using technology, I'm not sure how you get the scale you need to be able to do that, to educate people. It's very hard.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dale, that there's that, having some objective information that a supervisor can look at. I mean, you and I are, go back to the days of two-way windows and audio taping sessions, probably during grad school. And I can remember transcribing those things that was just, oh my God, that was horrible.
It's painful.
When we did this, we would audio tape a session and then we'd have to transcribe it using carbon paper so that one copy could go to the supervisor and you could keep a copy. Oh my God.
Denny, what's carbon paper?
Yeah, really. One step above clay tablets, and hieroglyphics. But yeah, it's changed. Things have changed a bit since in our careers, Dale. Hey, so what do you see coming down the road? What's got you excited about the whole AI focus?
Again, the tools that exist today are very powerful, and they're just at their infancy.
That's right.
So they're only going to get better.
Yeah.
Obviously, we all have concerns about the guardrails and the protections. So everything I say is within that context. But what are the other use cases? Where are the other, not just in SUD or mental health? Where are the other, home health? I mean, where else is there applicability for the introduction of this kind of intervention? And, the sky's the limit as far as I can see. At Cadenzia, we did medicated assisted treatment. We had a mobile van. We had, we were one of the relatively few residential providers. We had about 2,000 beds who actually did MAT within the residence. That was a huge pivot.
Oh, yeah.
But the more that the tools that exist can document that, can keep track of that, can represent that, can tie into outcome measures, that whole other world out there that ties together, it's going to be great. Not to replace individuals, because you can't replace the individual. You can't.
Right.
Everything can't be done through telemedicine or through a bot or something else. But a scarce resource are the individuals, and anything they're doing that can be done quicker, better, faster, smarter, I'm all for it. And I think that's where there's opportunity here as time goes on.
So if you were going to advise an organization about Elios, what would you encourage them to do relative to due diligence, and what questions should they be asking about AI in general and Elios specifically?
I go back to my clinical roots, and I start with, what's the culture like in your organization? I've been in organizations where the culture is one of change readiness, where there's one where people are not afraid of technology but embrace it, where they're looking for innovation, where they're looking to be to use their resources as prudently as they possibly can. In those situations, again, these are force multipliers, the Elios tool. It is maybe it's expensive, but it in the long run, it's going to be less expensive, and it's going to be more productive than anything else I know about. So organizations that are not just doing status quo work, but are looking at being there in the future, whether it's by themselves or part of something else, it's a value add to everyone to have this an environment that does this. I've watched at Cadenzia the same pattern that I watched in all the other organizations I ran, which was people were resistant until they weren't resistant. And then when they started to use the thing and were forced to use the thing, and then at some point down the road, they turn to you and they say, how did I ever do my job without this? And that is happening and will continue to happen. And that's critical. That's the evolution of this process. So I always wanted as a CEO to be ahead of that, or to be involved in that, so that again, I saw my job as assisting my staff to meet the mission of the organization. And I didn't want people doing things that they didn't have to do, that something else could substitute for that. I think there've got to be other big or little providers out there who feel the same way and want to get ahead of the curve. And I think they're the ones who are going to do some due diligence on this and see what it's like. Go look at the organizations that are doing this. I know Cadenzia hosts people all the time and is happy to do that. I'm sure there are others that are like that. It's pretty amazing when you see it. And it's pretty amazing when you talk to staff who were resistant and now are, disciples, that this kind of stuff is out there. But the role of a leader is to take prudent risk at times, is to make investments that maybe are painful to make, but that have a different kind of return on investment, if you will. And again, I don't see the Elios tool as unique to mental health and not SUD or other populations. I think, and I believe that there are going to be those organizations that acquire these assets are going to be ahead of the game and be more efficient and effective in what they do. But it's going to take time, energy, investment, change, and paying attention to the culture.
And I would argue leadership.
And leadership.
That I think you kind of demonstrated that. We could go on with this for a while, but we need to wrap it up here. But I want to say thank you to my good friend Dale. I'm glad we were able to do this. Dale believes technology is our friend, and AI can be a force multiplier, and I couldn't agree more. So with that, we will say goodbye. And Dale, thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Denny.